Lekgotla also agreed to expand the mandate of South African Reserve Bank beyond price stability to include growth and employment. You don't need to change the constitution to do that.
That's Ace Magashule talking about plans for the Reserve Bank, and Finance Minister Tito Mboweni then also jumped into the spat. He tweeted that only government sets the central bank's mandate. So who do we believe? And more importantly, can the Reserve Bank be used to fix the economy? Tonight we speak to Nancy Pai, political economist from Nassen's Advisory and Research. Good to have you in with us again. So it seems pretty dangerous, whatever's happening here, and I suspect it's more about politics than economics.
I think it really is, and I think the sad thing about it actually is the idea that all this time we've been talking about, stability, making sure that we understand that there's one message. I mean, even when we think about the compact that we've been trying to discuss about between business, the government and labor, to say, look, guys, can we actually all read from the same hymn sheet? So it's a bit difficult now to hear these different kinds of discussions. But I also think that actually it might be just the messaging, because part of the question here is around actually what it is that they're trying to communicate in terms of what they're saying. And it may be actually that everybody's saying the same thing, but the way it's being communicated is different. And I think that's probably one of the things.
You're being very generous there, aren't you? I mean, even as the day unfolded, you had the two camps, and as Tito Mboweni saying, we didn't say anything even remotely close to this.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think if you read the ANC documents from the conference, they quite spoke about this idea of, a bigger focus on employment, on growth, and I think it was jobs, or the expansion of this. So they have talked about it. It's not a new discussion. I think what there's been a confusion about it, and I think what is really, really important, I actually have been saying this, is to try and figure out how the discussion within the ANC can actually simplify these matters so that people understand what can be done, what can't be done. Because one has to ask themselves, what are the discussions that the different people are having about this? Or actually, are there different camps telling us things that we can't actually hear? And I think my biggest concern,
but you would also think that the people who deal with that is their focus, their priority and their speciality, would be the message bearers in this sort of instance.
Absolutely. So this is exactly the problem, right? Because the ANC does have very many smart people. And so you want to ask, so you don't want to undermine this thing, but understand perhaps there's something underneath that's being spoken. So what is the kind of messaging that's actually, the different people trying to say? What is the contestation that we are not getting? So that actually we all understand that we are on the same page.
But the message for the South African public and investors is that, there's a bit of confusion. Where does this leave Cyril Ramaphosa? What does it say about his power base? And therefore, the rand takes a battering today. The market take a battering, and this is the last thing we need after hearing about our GDP.
But I think also more importantly is that the people in power, do they actually understand the instruments that they've got and what capacity they've got? So many times when we talk about policy, right, we might think that by applying this policy we're going to achieve this outcome, and it turns out actually that's not what that policy does. So monetary policy, for example, has very complex effects, and it certainly also does not always deliver what people want it to deliver. And many times where people talk about it, I mean, there's always a very good example about what monetary policy can do, it cannot do. So it's almost like this kind of thing where you can drag the horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. And I think what has been happening here is the idea that, for example, we've had low interest rates for a very long time, but investment has not been coming. So it tells us there's something else in the system that's not working.
And I think is tackling the Reserve Bank the right way of going about it? Or is it saying, okay, listen, I mean, you want to say, well, fix what's broken first and then maybe look at the Reserve Bank?
Absolutely, because I think it is one institution over a number of institutions that need to work in our economic system. Whether we talk about, government institutions that have been failing in terms of actually producing policy and monitoring it and following it and checking the balances that are supposed to work, whether or not we're talking at departments, and then, of course, the Treasury, are we actually spending money on the right things? Are we following it up? And then we can get to the central bank and say, is the stability working? Are you actually making sure that we are at the right place at the right time? So this is the last place I suspect we should be talking in terms of actually trying to say we're going to create jobs, we're going to create employment, and we're going to grow the economy. The Reserve Bank is probably your last place to go. It can't be your first place.
And the way the suggestion was made that we resort to quantitative easing, which just makes you quake in your boots. Explain to us how that would work in our society and what sort of impact it would have and if it's likely to ever happen?
And you make a very, I think that's a very important question, because I think in the previous examples, it was actually, I mean, it's just a new phenomenon. So when the Americans brought quantitative easing to their environment, it was a confidence-building measure. They wanted to say to consumers, the banks look fragile. It looks like, a lot of this money has been lost through all the write-offs because we've been overspending and we've been writing down on housing. So as the central bank, we are going to provide money that suggests that actually if you run to your bank and you want your money, that you will find your money. So it was more of saying there are some holes here. We're going to plug those holes so that we can come. If you want your money, you can get it. So that money never left the financial system.
And it's not even really real, is it? I mean, it's creating money that you don't have, printing money that you don't have, and suddenly you've got lots of money, but actually it's worth nothing. And there's inflation, and look at Zimbabwe and
everything else. Absolutely, because actually what you want to do is to first be able to have a productive economy and use money to be able to actually chase goods and value that exists. In our environment, of course, people, if you hand somebody money, we all are going to run after the same goods because we haven't been doing much to build our productive capacity so that actually this money chases value in the economy. And I think that's our biggest problem, is that even if we print money and we give that money to Eskom, and then Eskom goes and buys coal, we have not been digging enough coal out of the ground. If we give that money to SAA, and we say, SAA, do this with the money, it will chase very few goods, and that is the thing that actually causes inflation, and then obviously we become more and more careless, and we dig ourselves.
And obviously, considering what we've just come out of, you think it's just another vehicle to pilfer. You've suddenly got extra cash in it and something else that the government is getting involved in.
I think some people ask the question actually about where are the intentions, where are we going? And I think it's a very fair question to ask, what are we actually trying to do? And what are the things that we have not been able to do that bring us here? One of the key things that we have to say about the SOEs, everybody says, yes, of course, we need to plug the holes in the SOEs. But also we have to fix the SOEs in a very structural manner, in the way they operate, for example. And that's what we've been hearing, for example, from the SAA director who has just resigned, to say, look, I have a plan to turn this thing around, but I'm not allowed. So plugging in money would be unlikely to be the solution to this problem. And I think it is true for every place. Because, of course, over a period of time, these entities have been given money. SAA has been given money for many, many, many years. But that clearly has not solved the problem. So our problems are much bigger than printing money and handing it over to an SOE.
Okay, so take Reserve Bank out of the equation here. So where does it leave our SOEs, and where is that money going to come from? Is it going to come from our banks? More loans?
I think because banks are no longer interested in lending to these institutions, because, of course, when you give money to the institution, you want to have the possibility that your money will come back. As we know that they are in no space now, in terms of their operations, to be able to meet these demands. That's why they keep borrowing and borrowing. Now they think, well, we're going to get a guarantee from the government. But the government, as we know, has very limited space to actually lend. Government debt is increasing. Our taxes, as we know, that when the economy doesn't grow, the tax collections lessen. So there is a hole there. So it is not something that the banks are too interested in doing at this moment. So it actually takes us back to the drawing board about what are the difficult things we've got to do to make sure that we fix. What would you like to hear
coming out in the next couple of days?
I think we have to actually say, I think in the SOEs in particular, because I think this whole printing of money, this whole quantitative easing speaks exactly to SOEs. And that actually what these CEOs have been telling us, what they're complaining about, as very professional people that were hired and trusted, are given the space to maneuver, to actually do the things they actually were hired to do.
Auntie Pai, thank you very much. Now, the climate crisis is worsening. We have limited time to prevent the extinction of our species. So how do we avert this impending disaster? It's coming up.